Hello, Year 11. So this is the second resource reliance lesson, and the title today is How are environments and ecosystems used and modified by humans? So what's an ecosystem? If you remember, we talked about this before. An ecosystem is defined as a community of plants and animals that interact with each other and their surroundings in order to survive. And what does this word modified mean, to be modified by humans? Well, it means to be changed. So we're going to have a look at some examples of where humans have modified or changed the environment and the impacts that's had on ecosystems. So we've got some before and after images here of where humans have modified the environment. So we can see before and after where humans have created a reservoir. So by building a dam across the river and then allowing that water to be held back and then moved into a reservoir to the side of that dam, we've got this man-made created store of water. And this is in Turkey, and you've got images there from 1976 and then 1999 where the dam has been built in between, and you can see how the landscape has been totally transformed by that dam. A huge amount of water is now stored in the area. The left-hand image, you've got lots of brown barren land, and on the right-hand image you can see that they're able to use that water for agriculture. You can see the green, particularly down the bottom right-hand corner. You can see that huge area of green cultivated land that's been possible because of this reservoir. So this is Lake Chad in Africa, the Cameroon, Niger, Nigeria, that kind of area. It used to be one of the largest lakes in Africa, but people have used the water for irrigation, so to water their crops. And this is in an area where there's not much rain falling to replenish the water that they're taking out. And they've created a situation where they are taking far more water, they're using far more water than is being replenished, than is being recharged, which obviously is completely unsustainable. And you can just see how small that lake now is. It's actually shrunk to 5% of its former size because of the actions of humans. I'm not too sure if that documentary that's mentioned down the bottom there is actually still around. That was a documentary from last year that Stacey Dooley did about fast fashion, where she was investigating how much water is being used and being polluted by the fashion industry in this way. Okay, now this is looking at Bolivia and the change that's happened along the Rio Grande River. And you can see that on the left you've got a rich, dense area of rainforest. There's not much in the way of human activity there at all. But by 2003 we've got this major agricultural area. We're full of fields, we're full of agriculture, and a dramatic change to that landscape has taken place as humans have moved in, deforested the land and turned it into agriculture and cattle ranches. And then this is Argentina and Brazil and Paraguay around the Iguacu Falls waterfalls. And again, you can see how humans have changed that landscape through deforestation and building on the land. Okay, so in terms of the specific activities that people are using which changes the ecosystems, we've got mechanisation of farming. And so the methods that are being used to farm are developing all the time. Technology is developing, and obviously modern technology means that modern farming uses a lot more machinery and technology than the traditional LIDC subsistence farmers who are doing everything by hand. So your tractors and your combine harvesters. And then when you start to look into it, there's a huge amount of technology. So using GPS, using global positioning systems on tractors, so you don't even need a driver. You can set it to go up and down your field and plant your seeds for you, plant your crops for you. You can have satellites that are looking at the conditions of your soil and working out where your most fertile areas of land are, so that you can plant most seeds in those areas. You've got computer programmed milking parlours. You no longer need somebody in there to milk the cows. You can do it all by machines, making farming much more efficient and increasing the amount of product that can actually be produced. So we call it commercial farming, where farmers are growing crops to sell them to make profit, to sell them to make money, as opposed to subsistence farming, which is what is taking place in a lot of LIDCs. And if you remember, subsistence farming is where they are just trying to grow enough crops to feed their own family. They're not selling anything, they're not making any profit from what they're growing. They're just trying to grow enough food to keep their family fed and keep their family well. When you actually look at a global scale, most of the world's farmers are still subsistence, small-scale farmers. So we need to be able to talk about how this commercial farming affects the environment. So biodiversity is reduced. If you grow one single crop, so you just grow wheat or you just grow corn, then you are massively reducing the biodiversity from a natural ecosystem. You essentially have a monoculture. You're just growing one crop. So in terms of the amount of insects and animals that can thrive from that ecosystem, it's massively reduced from a normal ecosystem. When we over-farm the land, then we lose nutrients. Those nutrients are obviously used up by the crops as they're growing, and then it rains and that washes the nutrients out. The tractors are churning up the soil, which exposes the soil to oxidation and weathering, and we lose a lot of the natural nutrients from the soil, making it much poorer quality. Soil erosion also increases. So you've churned up that soil, there are no longer any roots of trees and plants holding the soil together. So if you get very strong winds, if you get very heavy rain, it washes or blows that soil away. And in order to grow their crops, the farmers are putting herbicides and pesticides to kill the weeds and the insects. They're putting fertilizers onto their crops to make them grow big and strong. But then when it rains, all of those chemicals are washed into the rivers and the lakes. So eutrophication happens. Eutrophication is where the farmers have put their fertilizers on their crops to make the crops grow big and strong. The rain washes the fertilizers into the rivers and lakes. The fertilizers do their job. They make the algae grow big and strong in the river or in the lake. That then blocks out the sunlight from that water source. The algae all decomposes as it dies, which then uses up the oxygen in the water, and essentially that water becomes lifeless because all of the oxygen has been removed from it. So that's eutrophication. That's a big impact of commercial farming on the environment. So here you've got some sentences to get that process of eutrophication into your books. You need to put them into the right order. So if you want to pause here and do so. And here's the correct order. So make sure you've got that in the right order to explain eutrophication. And this is an impact on the environment of commercial farming. Okay, so what about commercial fishing? There's been quite a lot in the news recently about fishing, with us leaving the EU and how important our fishing rights are to us as a country, as an island. It's really important. Globally, fish consumption has gone up massively, increased hugely, and it's certain types of fish that are more in demand than others. So for example, tuna fish. And we've seen some pretty big impacts of this commercial fishing on the marine ecosystem. So lots of fish are grown in fish farms. So they put these cages into the water and they spawn the fish and they grow them within those cages. So for example, salmon farms up in Scotland. However, often these fish develop diseases and their waste is washed out into the ocean. Sometimes the fish escape from their pens and that can then spread diseases into the surrounding ecosystem, which can be an impact of that. And there are lots of reasons why commercial fishing is bad for the environment. You've got a couple of good YouTube clips here that I would definitely recommend that you watch. They're quite interesting. So overfishing. Certain species of fish, like tuna, for example, are greatly in demand and have been caught nearly to extinction. We also had a similar situation with cod in the North Sea in recent years, where everybody wants cod and chips for their fish and chips on a Friday night. So cod as a species has been massively overfished. And there are certain things that have been put in place to try to stop this. So for example, quotas. So fishermen are only allowed to catch, each boat is only allowed to catch a certain amount of fish, particular species of fish in a year. And once they've reached their quota, that's it. They can't land any more fish of that particular species. However, this has led to another problem, which is the problem of bycatch. So if you've got a quota, you can't send your nets down saying to the net, don't catch any tuna, I've already met my quota. So what happens is they bring the net up and they've got some tuna in there. They've already gone over their quota, so they can't bring them to shore. Now these fish are already dead or dying, but they can't bring them to shore, so they simply throw them over the side of the ship. And if you watch that clip there, it's actually quite shocking to see what actually has to go on just to meet the regulations. And sometimes this bycatch can be 90% of the fisherman's catch. It's really quite shocking. And all that they can do, and it breaks their heart really, all they can do is throw these fish back into the sea. They're already dead, so it's a complete and utter waste, but they are meeting their quota and they won't get their fine. Then we've got the issue of bottom trawling. So this is where the ships have these huge nets, they're weighted nets, and they drag them along the bottom of the ocean floor. So you can imagine this huge weighted net being dragged across the bottom of the ocean. It's going to destroy everything in its path. So poor old Nemo and his friends down there, they have a rude awakening with this huge net scrapes across their ecosystem and destroys everything. There are even some fishermen who use poison, cyanide. They spray it into the ocean, it stuns the fish and makes it easier for them to catch. Obviously that is hugely damaging for the ecosystem. So in terms of how commercial fishing affects the environment, you can talk about overfishing, you can talk about bycatch, bottom trawlers, and you can talk about poison. And then we've got deforestation. So why are we deforesting specifically? The specification wants us to look at in terms of obtaining energy supplies. So why are we chopping down trees in order to produce energy? So most of the energy we use currently in the world obviously comes from fossil fuels, coal, oil and gas. And we need to extract those from the ground using mining. We've also got this new process of fracking that has been used in recent years, particularly in America. So you need to be able to access the ground. So you need to cut down whatever's on top of it. You need to deforest the ground in order to be able to access it. Fracking is where you drill a hole down into the rock, often it's shale, and you send huge quantities of water and sand and chemicals down into that hole under extreme pressure, the idea being that it will then fracture and crack the surrounding rock, and that will then release the gas that is trapped within the shale, and it will then make its way to the surface and you can get hold of it. But then you are deforesting the land in order to carry out that process, which can be very bad for the ecosystems. There's also a lot of people who say that fracking is extremely bad. It can create small earthquakes and it can destabilise the ground. So you can have a little look there at the people of Lancashire in England and why they're unhappy about fracking. If we go to the LIDCs and think about why they're chopping down the trees, they're deforesting the land for energy, it's literally gathering wood as fuel wood, to use that wood to create their fires that they then use to cook and they use for heating. On a similar theme to the mining, to the fracking, this is on a larger scale. So this is cast mining. So to get at coal on a large scale from the ground. Here you've got a big cast mine and you can just see the devastating impact that has on the environment. If you look at that picture, the vegetation has all been completely removed. They've had to build roads and railways and pipelines as infrastructure, and there's nothing left there of the natural ecosystem that was there before. Another reason that we are deforesting the land for energy is chopping down trees in order to grow biofuels. So when you grow plants like sugar, corn, palm oil, because of the oils within them, they can then be used as a type of fuel. And demand has increased for these biofuels because they are better for the environment than burning fossil fuels. However, in order to grow the biofuels, we are deforesting the land. So we're chopping down the trees in order to grow biofuels. So it's a bit of a difficult one. It's obviously better for the environment to use the biofuels, but in order to do so, we're deforesting the land. So we're harming the environment in order to be better for the environment. So we need to be able to talk about the different types of pollution that are created through obtaining energy supplies. So if you put this as a middle of a spider diagram, then you can add your notes around the outside from the next few slides. So soil pollution, when you mine, when you drill, you release toxic chemicals into the rocks. They then get washed into the soil, which pollutes the soil, which means then nothing grows. It's devoid of all life. And then you've got river pollution. The chemicals from the mines, the drilling, get washed into the rivers, and that then kills the fish, kills the plants within the rivers. Ocean pollution. So when we transport oil around the world, we transport it in oil tankers, and there have been a few very significant oil spills over the years. This was the Deepwater Horizon oil well that exploded near Florida in 2010, the BP oil well, and 4.9 million barrels of oil leaked into the ocean. We had these horrible images of sea creatures. If you look at that bottom right picture, that is a seabird absolutely caked in oil. So huge amount of fish and seabirds, dolphins, turtles were killed, and then the oil obviously contaminated the entire ecosystem, washed up onto the beaches, filled up the ocean, sank to the bottom of the ocean floor, and had huge impacts. So there's just a few more images from that Deepwater Horizon oil spill. Some statistics: 8.3 billion oysters were killed. Coral reefs showed signs of damage. The pelicans there, you can see the bottom right, were impacted. And scientists reckon 167,000 sea turtles were killed during the disaster. Then you've got air pollution. Mining creates a lot of dust. And those chemicals within the dust, the sulfur, the arsenic, pollute the air as well as the soil and the water. And then, of course, when you burn fossil fuels, you also release sulfur dioxide, nitrous oxides into the atmosphere, which then mix with the rain to create acid rain, which then does further damage to the ecosystem. So you can have a go at rearranging these statements to show how mercury moves up the food chain. So if you have a pause. So this is the answer. So when you burn coal, it releases mercury into the atmosphere. When it rains, that mercury then comes into the ocean and pollutes the ocean. Then the plankton in the ocean absorb the mercury, the small fish eat the plankton, the large fish eat the small fish, and then humans eat the large fish. And there we've got mercury getting into the human food chain. So 4-marker here, describe 2 ways in which ecosystems are altered by obtaining energy supplies. Have a go and upload your answer to that for me, please.